Okay, hey guys, this is from Chapter 2, and we're going to just do part of Wednesday's lecture online so we can all save time. So there's just a few words that I want you to know, and to do this, what I want you to do is print out this Chapter 2 Methods worksheet. You'll find it on Blackboard in the Course Materials folder. So if you don't have it, go ahead and do that now because I want you to use it during the video, all right? So go ahead and get that, and then pause, come back, all right? So as far as the words we need to know, some vocabulary. Stimulus. That is something that can elicit a response. It's something that gets a reaction. So if you kick me and I say ouch, the kick is the stimulus and the ouch is the response. Response is my reaction. This can be a behavior, it can be something I say, it could just be something I think or feel, all right? So it's what follows the stimulus. It sounds really easy, and it is, but just make sure you know this part because it can cause problems later if you get them confused. Like, I gave a test, and I had people telling me a toaster was a response. Not possible, okay? A response is something you do or feel or say, so a response is a reaction, and it's a reaction to some stimulus. Okay, now when you get to the response, they can be one of two kinds. It can be overt, which simply means other people can see it. So if something you do or say or you make a weird face, I can see that. It's an overt response. If it's covert, that means it's a response that you have that I cannot see. So it would be a thought you have, maybe a feeling if you mask it really well and I don't know you're mad because you're smiling. That could be covert. So usually it's something you think or feel. All right, so right now what I want you to do is pause the video and do the first couple of things on this methods worksheet, all right? Do this section, that section. When you're done, come back and we'll keep going. Okay, I assume you're done, so we'll keep going. All right, let's see here. Now, when we talk about stimuli, we can have different kinds, different words. An appetitive stimulus, this is something that you're willing to work for. An easy way to say it is you like it, but I'd rather have you think of it as something you'll work for. So let me see, things that I think are appetitive. Sushi, I will pay money to get it. I will travel in a car to go to a restaurant to get it. So sushi is apparently appetitive for me. Now it might be aversive to someone's view. You might think, gross, get that away from me. I'm going to walk away. I don't want it. Aversive is something that you want to avoid. Okay, so any kind of stimulus can be considered appetitive. You want it, you'll work for it. Or aversive, you don't want it, you want to get away from it. And that's always going to be completely up to you what you find appetitive or what you find aversive. So for example, I have an 8 a.m. class and there's students sitting there. Well, apparently then coming to class at 8 a.m. is appetitive because you were actually willing to get out of bed and come to class. You're willing to work for it. Now, I would assume there's something about being in class that you think is worth being there. Like, oh, I'm going to do better on the exam, or I'll get to take the quiz, or something like that. But whatever it is, if you work for it, it's appetitive. If you work to avoid it, it's aversive. Okay. Now, these two things down here are what we call the establishing operations. There are ways to make something more appetitive or more aversive. Now, deprivation is the first one. It's like the regular word, depriving something. You can't have it or you haven't had it for a long time. Well, usually when we don't have things or we can't have them, that makes us want it more, right? So it actually increases, my little arrow here means increases appetitiveness, and deprivation decreases aversiveness, all right? So if I haven't had something in a long time, I'm like, oh, it's been so long since I've had Little Caesar's pizza. So if I can have it, I really want it. It's extra appetitive to me. Now, on the other hand, if I have too much of something, I'm not going to want it as much, right? So if I go on a roller coaster like 4 times, I kind of get satiated. It's not as fun anymore. So satiation usually decreases appetitiveness and increases aversiveness, okay? After a while, you've had something a lot. You're like, oh, I'm so sick of Little Caesar's pizza now. That's my cat, sorry. So typically that works. Now you can always find exceptions to that. Like sometimes, for some folks, satiation, if they do something a lot like exercise, they actually like it more, which is a little bit strange, I have to admit. But or deprivation, I think your book uses the example. If like a lot of times vegetarians if they don't eat meat. If it's been a long time, then they don't even want it anymore. So you can find exceptions, but be sure you can understand that deprivation, usually leads to an increase in appetitiveness, and satiation is the opposite. All right. Now, here's an idea that you should know from research design if you've taken it. But we're going to be talking about a lot of variables, and we need to know what an operational definition is. Essentially, an operational definition answers the question, how did you measure that? So if I say, oh, that was a really good class. Well, how did you measure that? What do you mean by really good class? Or, here, my cat here, Daryl, she's a terrible pet. She's actually the worst pet in the world. Sorry. And it's like, well, your question is why? How did you measure that? And I say, okay, well, my cat Daryl here is a terrible pet because she pees in the closet. Okay, so that's my definition, my operational definition of a bad pet. And I've told you exactly what I mean by that. So if we do some examples, what if I want to do, what's an operational definition of best salesperson? Well, there's a number of ways I could measure that, right? I could say the person who has the most number of sales in a month. Or I could say not number of sales, but actually the dollar amount. So maybe Joe sold 5 things and Barb sold 10, but Joe's sales total in money that was spent was higher, so he's the best salesperson. Maybe I want to actually do customer surveys, and whoever gets the highest ratings, they're my best salesperson. So there are different operational definitions you could use, and that's fine, and we can debate whether or not we agree with each, but as long as it's operationally defined, I know exactly what you're doing to measure that. Here's another example. What if you do best high school in America? How do you do that? Now, U.S. News and World Report does that every year, and they got a lot of flack because how would you define best high school? I mean, would it be the percentage of students who graduate or go to college, or GPAs or SAT scores or something like that? Yeah, any of those would be operational definitions. Well, it turns out U.S. News and World Report, I don't know if this is still true, but one year it kind of boiled down to that the way they decided best high school was the number of students who took AP classes. Now, it wasn't even the number of students who passed the AP classes or passed the test. It was just number of students who signed up for classes. Now, that is an operational definition. I think most of us would kind of argue is not a really good one to say that's the best school. But that's how they were measuring that. Okay, so I want you to get ready to pause again. On your sheet, you have 3 things that I ask you to do operational definitions. I'd like you to do the team member, most valuable team member, like of a sports team. Okay, so pause it and come up with 3 operational definitions for most valuable team member, and then unpause and we'll keep going. Okay, I hope you did it. I hope you're not just watching, because you won't learn anything unless you do it. Probably some of you did things like the highest point scored. That would be a good one. You could do anyone, fewest missed practices. Okay. You could also do, did any of you put maybe down the team member the other teammates like the most? Okay, well now that's a definition that's not quite there. I would have to ask, well, how do you measure that they liked them the most? So maybe, oh, well, they scored him the highest on something, or we actually wrote down, we voted for the best, most valuable team member, and he won the vote. That would work. Okay, but you have to be really careful about operational definitions that don't get all the way there, and they still need explanation. And we'll practice this on Wednesday in class. All right, moving on. Let's see. Okay, last thing we're going to do in the video is looking at these ways to record data. Okay, so this is in your Chapter 2. You can look at all these. Some of them are really obvious. This is basically how do you collect data. And one of the most obvious ways is to count. All right, so my cat Daryl over here. If I say, oh, she pees in the closet all the time. Well, if I want to take data on it, I'd have to measure, well, how many days per month has she peed in my closet? That would be an example of a frequency. Now, the thing is, frequencies don't mean anything unless you put them over some kind of time period. So if I said, oh, Daryl peed in the closet 3 times, but is that 3 times in a day, 3 times in a month, 3 times in a year? Okay, so it matters, which really makes it a rate. It's how many times in some measure of time. You could also measure something's intensity. Now that's really how much of something you have, so like weight, how heavy is it, or how strong is it, and this works for attitudes and feelings too. So I can say, can you rate how much you liked that class on a scale of 1 to 7? Okay, so if you liked it a 3 and somebody else liked it a 5, well, they liked it at a greater intensity. Duration is just the length of time that a behavior occurs. Pretty easy. Speed, how fast it goes. It's speed, you know what that means. Latency means how long does it take, the time between some starting point and for the behavior to begin. So let's say I'm interested in maybe somebody's kind of social behavior, and I want to find out, all right, so this guy walks into a bar, how long does it take him to approach a stranger and introduce himself? Does it take 5 minutes? Does it take 20 minutes? Okay, so that would be a latency. I have some start point, and then I see how long until the behavior occurs. Number of errors, we mentioned this in like rats running mazes, wrong turns, or if you take exams and you get a question wrong, that would be the number of errors. We can measure behavior that way. And the last one I'm going to mention here is topography. Now if you think of what is a topographic map, it's one of those maps that shows like elevation and water and forest and all this stuff. So topography is what something looks like. So what does a behavior look like? Now there's some things that we actually judge on topography, like if you think certain sports like diving or dancing, are you a good dancer? Well, that has to do with how you look when you're dancing. Or gymnastics, we're scoring the gymnasts on how they look when they do their tricks and flips and stuff. So I can measure behavior. Now it could also be something like, do you eat with a fork or do you eat with chopsticks or do you eat with your hands? That would be topography. What does the behavior look like? And I can take data on that. There's a couple more data collection techniques that we will look at in class, the interval recording and time sampling. So look at those in your book. Now what I want you to do is bring the sheet with you on Wednesday because we're going to work more on it and we're going to finish the stuff on the back in class. And my goal is if you've watched this, you've done this part of the worksheet, and even work on these eating behaviors with all the ways of recording data, and look it up in your book. It has explanations as well. And if you can get that filled out and bring it to class on Wednesday, we might save ourselves enough time to actually take Friday off. Maybe. Okay. But this could save us a lot of time that you're doing this part on your own. All right? So we're going to try it, and you have to come in. I'm not explaining this on Wednesday, so you have to have this part done, ready to go and work in groups for the rest of it. Okay? Awesome. See you guys soon.